I 100% think almost every security engineer is incredibly competent. They really know ins and outs of what can go wrong and what good looks like. The challenge that we really have is that of change management, to call it as a project manager would call it, is going from finding something that's wrong to, okay, how can we get this implemented across the board? And sometimes it means every single developer team needs to make a change. Sometimes it means a platform team needs to make a change. Managing that and being effective at that, I think that's the most difficult thing.
Welcome to the season 3 of the Elephant and AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host and AppSec enthusiast and growth manager at Escape.
Today, I'm joined by Koen Hendrix, Director of Product Security at Zendesk. With over a decade of experience in tech and gaming industries, Koen has been instrumental in building and scaling global security teams, integrating security into agile environments, and driving innovation in product security processes. Known for building strong relationships with global product and engineering leaders, he brings a wealth of expertise to today's conversation.
In this episode, we discuss why non-negotiable security practices must be clearly communicated to teams, and where Koen thinks we need to draw the line between secure enough and perfect security. We also explore how change management has become a significant challenge in security, and discuss why implementing secure by design principles requires gradual step-by-step improvements. If you agree with Koen's perspective that collaboration is often overlooked in favor of tools and want to learn how to implement it effectively, this episode is for you. If you enjoy this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and follow it on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. It's the best way to avoid missing future episodes. With that, get ready to hear Koen's opinions. Dive right in. Hi, Koen. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today with me. It's actually going to be the start of the third season of the Elephant of AppSec. So I'm super excited, to have you on board. Thanks for finding the time, and looking forward, to dive into talking about product and application security with you. Especially had like a very international experience. You work in a very international team, now at Zendesk. It's based, I think, both in Europe and the US. And you've also traveled a lot, for speaking sessions and presentations. And I've seen you've done, one session at AppSec Calais, I remember, a couple of years ago, on like why some product teams are great and others aren't. We kind of talked about it on LinkedIn as well at some point, and at this talk you can explore, why some product teams are actually excel at integrating security in their practices and workflow, and others like completely, fail. So I think you draw based on your experience from Riot Games before us, I remember.
Yep.
I think I totally kind of agree with you, in that each product team is different, plus the ones that I've worked with personally and are unique in a certain way, which also kind of driven by their product manager, and their security behaviors are also different. But I think you mentioned that they tend to fall kind of in a predictable patterns, right? So how do you think you can help someone to recognize those patterns within their product teams?
Yeah. The challenge I found with trying to find those patterns is it does require like in-depth looking at teams, as in going to visit them one by one, which is awesome if you have time and want to look at 10 teams. If you want to look at 300 teams, it gets a little bit more of a challenge. As I started to look at that exercise, a few rules that I was taught and I wanted to keep in mind there is, obviously, engineers don't intentionally want to write insecure code. So
of course.
Results of vulnerabilities is almost always an accident or something that was glossed over and not something that people do intentionally. I think a more important component is that most engineers can think of between 80 and 98% of all the security concerns we can come up with as security professionals. But they just need to have time to think about it. And that kind of comes to the crux of many of the programs and efforts that we security people do, is engineers have many things on their plate. And security is one of them, but they must juggle all of those items. And if, for the sake of the argument, we say they got 100 things they could do in a given week, they may only have time for 1 or 2 security items. So if we want to throw more on there, they may or may not have time for that, or they may just push that back. So as we start to look at these teams, and obviously the catch is like a team needs to have to begin with a decent amount of experienced people on it. If it's only interns, then yes, they're going to be more likely to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But if they have some experienced engineers on them, then as soon as that prerequisite is met, then that's all fine. Then kind of the simplest thing that we just saw is that the teams that just automatically, as part of their team culture, talk about what can go wrong or what can be insecure about this, or how can we make sure this is secure. When that naturally comes up in conversations, like those are, from the security perspective at least, the rock star teams that are incredibly secure. So if you're looking at one of those teams or at the Slack channels or go to one of the stand-ups, and you see them ask those questions regularly, and it's just kind of a natural conversation point, then yeah, those teams are great. Those are, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, also the teams that most often reach out to security for advice. And then
Fortunately,
we kind of have,
I hope.
well, I mean, then we also have kind of a what do you call it, a confirmation bias, or we have a preaching the choir situations, like the folks that are already coming to us already thinking about security, and we will have marginal gains there. Whereas those other teams where they don't think about security, that's where we have the biggest gains that we can make, the biggest wins that we can have. And
Okay.
I mean, it always feels good when people come talk to me and I can help them, but perhaps if I talk to other people, I may have more impact, and that's a very difficult thing to uncover. That's a very difficult thing to cover.
Yeah. How do you think you can maybe create a process, that actually helps to those people who are not actually maybe proactive by coming, to you with their security challenges, to actually maybe submit, their security challenge at the X point of time? Like, do you think you can actually create a process that pushes those low-hanging fruits to also be more proactive in the security?
I think that's an incredibly hard thing to do well. And I see two approaches that kind of work, but they don't really solve it. But they get you a lot closer. So on one end, as a security team, you can have those active reach outs and have like one security engineer be responsible for like 5 to 10 teams and say, hey, go and have a chat with them, ask what they're doing. And that way you kind of build that culture a little bit. Or you can really give those teams tools themselves to have those conversations. Like hey team, we see you have some challenges. Can you guys start to ask this particular question every time you do sprint planning, and do have like a mini threat model themselves? That would, in my opinion, be most effective. But having that really built into it and teams to really adopt that, that's a very hard thing to do. So the best answer, I think, in that realm is active reach outs of security people. But to scale that out really becomes a challenge. And that is an approach we use, for example, at Zendesk, at my current place. We did use that a lot. And right now we're really starting to struggle with the scale of that effort. Because as soon as the engineering org keeps scaling and the security orgs does not scale at the same volume or the same rate, that just becomes a problem. You need to have other ways of building in security.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense, because then it's just the security team starts to be submerged with all the like maybe tickets, depending, on the workflow, instead of like development teams actually being submerged with the security tasks, for sure. And do you think, like, depending on the cultural background, some teams are maybe naturally better, at actually implementing security standards, or maybe more efficient security standards, compared to others?
I mean, efficient, of course, the more you do in this realm, the better you get at it. But kind of answering, I think the point that you're trying to ask is that it stands with the leaders either within the group or above a group. They are the people that say, hey, security is important, or let's talk about this at a regular basis. And if you have somebody that does that at a regular basis, right, those folks are awesome. What I see, and that's only anecdotal evidence, right? Those are the people that if you do report a vulnerability to them, or you have an urgent situation, they will be the ones that come back to you and say, like, oh yeah, we assessed this endpoint or this box, but those 5 other boxes or 5 other endpoints are actually also similar. We also looked at those while we were at it. That's that group of people that will be that level proactive. So yeah, to your point, like it really stands with the leaders above the team. Yeah, so like you can go and talk to a software engineer about security at any day of the week, and all of them will be interested, or almost always will be interested. But if their leadership does not have security top of mind, or does not see security as a valuable time spent, at some point there is going to be a prioritization clash there where it breaks
For
down.
sure.
And you need to have their engineering directors, managers, whatever. They need to be on board with that. And that's an easy gap to overlook. When we talk about security champions, we always talk to individuals and rarely to the people outside of that.
And do you think like it's your job in a sense to create these relationships, with this leadership, to actually make them make security as their top of mind, as the, leader, the director of product security yourself?
Yes. I think that enables our people to do the right thing. It also allows for like, hey, when we have something that isn't a quick fix that comes up, it allows me to have the conversation with them and ask for like, hey, we need a bigger time commitment, or what is the status of other work that may or may not impede this, and that supports that conversation. Absolutely, 100%.
And you also given one of the talks on the Agile organization, so the kind of very fast shipping, super fast. I couldn't I wanted to watch it and ask you questions about it, but I couldn't access the recording any longer because it was a webinar that finished. What do you think makes the Agile approach of working? Because not all organizations adapt this approach. What do you think is particularly unique for that?
When I hear people talk about Agile, I interpret that as two components that are incredibly important to that. Number one is that the development teams are set up to be able to completely independently deliver, hopefully working software without additional gates, additional reviews, whatnot. So they are completely able to deliver on their own, no questions asked. And number two, that means that as soon as they do put something in the customer hands, customer provides feedback and plans will change. And sometimes those plans change small and sometimes those plans change big. And that means that as a security organization, whatever we do at any point in time will, within 24 hours, sometimes even faster, or usually even faster, already be out of date. And that also means that we have very little control over the changes, the thousands of changes that occur and get pushed to production every week or even every day. So how we try and keep up with that, or how we try to figure out, okay, where is security sensitive stuff happening? Where do we want to get more eyes? Or where do we want to talk to the people to really understand what's happening? And sometimes to make sure that all the incremental changes that happen all the time, that there's some guardrails around that to make they happen in a secure way. And all of that without trying to block or slow down development. We have very limited ability to block things, but if we slow things down, it's also not good for the business or for the overall engineering health. That is incredibly difficult. No matter how many tools we throw at the problem, and no matter how nicely they all shift left and integrate left, I'll keep coming back to that story of engineers have 1,000 things to do or 100 things to do every week, and they got time for one or two security things. How do we prioritize that? What do we throw on their plate? And how well are we able to support that and get a problem at the time solved? That's our perpetual equation that we try to balance out every single day.
And do you think, depending on the application that you list, that kind of integrates within your prioritization scales? So, for example, if you update something, let's say in the beta version, and there is a security problem that might happen, would it be more a priority for you to fix, since it's already kind of live, versus, I don't know, something that's still in development or in staging?
Yep. If teams come to us, or if we learn about something that is in active development, about to go release, or it's an early release, that is important at that point to be there. Ultimately, our customer pay our bills and our salaries, and if something's already in their hands, if they want to use it, if we're about to deliver that value as a business to those customers, right, that is obviously where our attention should be. That also means there's already real production data going in that thing or close to go in that thing. And that means it should have our priority to secure that, assuming we indeed know of like a big problem, right? And then it's also a nice education opportunity to go and talk to those engineers, say, okay, next time, let's sit down a little bit earlier. How can we help you figure out what to prevent or what to help? And that's a nice what do you call it, like relationship building opportunity or teaching opportunity, rather than the whole you guys did something wrong, and because that doesn't work. Even if it's a horrible security incident, that stuff never works and always gets you back in the end.
And what do you think, are some non-negotiables, like in terms of security, where you really have to tell them, okay, slow down, guys, we really need to fix this? What do you think? Like, do you have any examples?
I mean, if you intentionally or very easily have like the customer data like accessible to everyone, like that obviously is a clear example. If you can count the amount of times you need to pull that string, like if you need 2 hands to count that number, you probably are in trouble and you're pulling it too often. We do call that muscle like a handful of times per year and say like, hey, this really needs to stop. You guys really are either putting this is going to sound boring, but like a contractual obligation or compliance obligation or an actual real security problem at risk, and that needs to stop. But then if you do have like a good reputation within the company for being considerate, if you do have a good reputation for helping people understand things, an educational approach rather than a whip approach, then people will be receptive to that and they will default to your judgment. And that is a very nice place to be. That is a hard-earned place to be for us. But yeah, as a security team, that should be your place to go towards it. If you do call no, if you do say stop, that people will listen and will take you seriously before you have even explained it. Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important bit, because if you call stop every week, people are going to start ignoring you or start working around you.
Do you think, like, if you see someone on your team, as the team leader, who's actually doing all the time, the applying VIP approach, or like you just do that and without any educational aspect around it, how do you personally approach this kind of situations? Do you think it's something that you can teach to other people? Is it something that should be ingrained when you hire someone?
Yes to both. I believe fundamentally people want to help and people want to do the right thing. If people have been in a career, a place where for years it was kind of a blaming or just throw things over the fence kind of place, like that mindset, it takes time to get out of it. But I fundamentally believe, and I've seen people that come from such a place that demonstrate like, yes, I can have the collaborative mindset, and with coaching and with support, like they can build up that muscle. And yes, that's difficult, but they can build that. Similarly, what we see many people that are very junior, just coming out of college and have their first job, they also often come in with the everything must be fixed right now approach. And then once reality hits, they very quickly learn of, okay, not everything is on fire. We can take a look, we can assess things in context, we can go talk to engineers, ask them what's really up. And so yeah, that approach, like, yes, it's coaching, it's guidance, it's also really highlighting people that are doing this incredibly well. I have had the luxury of having a few people in the team that do this better than I can, so I'm still learning from them, and I use them as an example to everybody else in the team and look at how Alice and Bob go and talk to those teams. Like, that is fantastic, and let's try and emulate that behavior. Yeah, that's important. I think people can learn, and some people are better at it automatically or intuitively than others. But I like to think I haven't hired any psychopaths yet. So as long as people aren't in that category, right? It's yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes it can be, hiring can be super difficult, to find actually to test for those soft skills, because to test for hard skills, it's quite easy. You give a case study, a technical test, and whether it's done, it's done. But actually trying to understand whether the person would be a perfect fit for that specific position from a soft skills point of view, it's very, very hard.
Exactly.
And so I'm not sure if you would want to give any advice to someone, who is listening. How would you recommend them, at that hiring stage, kind of to distinguish people who would be a really good fit for the security role?
Obviously, like the technical bits, the basics do need to be there. I think we can all easily agree on that. That doesn't mean they have to be a security expert, but have technical competency, right? I personally have recently hired a few software engineers that are having a high interest in security. I can't teach them software engineering, but we can teach them security, right? And that's a relatively easy gap to bridge. To your point is, do they have the soft skills? Do they understand that not everything is right or wrong, but there's this massive gray zone in between. The main questions that we asked in that context is like when risk trade-offs have to be made, when they've had a case where they cannot implement a perfect fix, how they felt about that, how they handled that situation. Same for how they handle disagreement with either a product manager or an engineering manager and how they handle those conversations. Similarly, what we like to do is a threat model exercise, even with people that are not security engineers, just to understand can they go through this system? Can we work with them through a prioritization exercise and not everything must be ready in one go, but something that encourages the incremental approach? And then what happens if we do throw the curveball at it of like, hey, the business says we have to release this tomorrow. What quick stopgap can we implement to really work out those kind of soft skills, and can they go and talk? And I don't need people to be like a salesperson able to go and talk to everybody, be everybody's friend. But they do need to be able to have a conversation with them. And as soon as conversations get more complex, right, then sure, throw your manager under the bus and make it their problem. But go and talk to individual engineers or a team of software engineers. I think every security engineer should be able to do that and clearly convey their points, but also clearly convey questions of where they think they might be wrong, where they think their understanding can be improved. Because what we see is often very either simplified or it's an ideal situation. And the gap between current situation and ideal situation is often larger than we think it is. It's more difficult to get there than we think it is. Yeah, like trying to find those kind of understanding areas in an interview is incredibly important. People that do exhibit that behavior very well, in my limited experience, are people incredibly successful in their roles as security engineers, because they can bridge the change gap that is needed.
Very interesting. And it's kind of trying to find those people who would not, as we discussed, before, would send actually just Slack message to the engineers, saying, hey, this tool is coming, deal with it. And great, what can I do with it? But actually, they try to shift towards more like a collaborative approach, discussed before, proactive approach. We're thinking about, implementing a new tool, a new process, or initiative. How can we do it? What is your opinion there? And how can we collaborate on that? I think it is very hard to identify, but eventually, I guess it's possible. Like, do you believe actually in something to be, it's like secure? Like we talk a lot now in the security about secure by design, secure by default. Do you actually believe it's something that we can implement within especially, large scale organization?
The main thing I like to think of there is like secure by default also comes in different levels, right? If every team uses a blessed image, even though that's just a basic bare bones image, great, that's already your secure default level 1. And then you start to put whatever you build on top of that, and you make it more and more secure, build more security defaults in there. And gradually you go from a secure default level 1 to secure default level 8, right? Or whatever equivalent we want to use in that anecdote. But the challenge is going from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, and make every step there. So yes, I believe we can, in almost every technology, go to secure defaults. And if you go back 20 years, right, when most web vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting happened all day, every day, and nowadays we have a lot of frameworks that have secure defaults integrated by default. And every time a new iteration comes out, they make it another like one step more secure. So the same is true for infrastructure. The same is true for business logic. You can keep building one step at a time. And that mindset is incredibly powerful, because you can't get to perfect security from today to tomorrow. I can go from level 5 to level 6 in a few weeks or months' time, depending on the context. To answer your question, yes, I really strongly believe in secure defaults, but also people do need to acknowledge of like the secure default may just be, let's all use a basic thing. Let's all use the same thing to get started with, the same platform or the same technology, even though it may be horribly insecurely configured today. But if we all use the same thing, we can gradually go up. And that is, I find many security professionals struggle with that mindset of like, yeah, this thing's horribly insecure, okay, but it's one step better than where we're currently at. So that's okay, right? We're trying to break complex problems into slightly less complex problems, and this is one step forward.
Yeah, not to see everything, like black and white, perfectly secure or not secure at all, but trying, to take one step at a time and accept that we can't, have perfect security in a sense. But it takes, it takes time. Sometimes some people, as you mentioned before, it's hard for them to see that, and it takes some education and actual maybe also experience, I would say, in a sense, to understand it and to learn what matters, a lot. And do you think we focus in general when you think about security a lot more and more now on tools rather than on this collaboration and educational aspect, especially with the DevSecOps and everything operations should be automated as much as possible. We implement 20 tools, sometimes hundreds, and some companies really and actually think more about technical skills in this case, but not enough on the communication skill side.
Yeah, I mean, tools will always keep being iterated on and keep developing, right? A few years ago, we started to see the introduction of eBPF sensors and whatnot, and that's awesome. That's really giving a lot of visibility, a lot more information to work with. I 100% think almost every security engineer is incredibly competent. They really know ins and outs of what can go wrong and what good looks like. The challenge that we really have is that of change management, to call it as a project manager would call it, is going from finding something that's wrong to, okay, how can we get this implemented across the board? And sometimes it means every single developer team needs to make a change. Sometimes it means a platform team needs to make a change. Managing that and being effective at that, I think that's the most difficult thing, because again, I can go back to the teams have 100 things they can do every week, and security can only do 1 or 2 things in there. Maybe if we have a lucky week or a very security conscious team, we can do 5 or 6. But if we come there with 1,000 things on a balance of 100, it's just not going to happen, especially if we realize that the business is also there to kind of serve the customers, to solve the problem that the customers have in the first place. So yeah, that's incredibly difficult to balance. So something that helps us manage that change, help understand what the real impact is, what the real cost of the change is, that is incredibly important. And I mean, not that I would build my own tool for that. I think that's more of a project management or program management type of approach that helps. But we've got plenty of tools. That's not the problem. But we've got limited time to ingest, analyze, understand what they do.
But how would you, for example, you mentioned, several times you can do only 1 or 2 things throughout the week to fix for the security. How would you concrete step, what framework do you use, what process do you use to prioritize those 1, 2 things? Because now, do you know the rise of SPM solutions? They kind of try to fix that problem. Some teams build internal. I know one large bank in the US, they build internally their own SPM to prioritize. How would you recommend to prioritize those 1 or 2 things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when shit hits the fan, right, that's your priority. But if we really talk about operationalizing, right, security work, this is a nice place that we are at in our journey at Zendesk, where we've got a lot of teams that are doing pretty good at the regular patch management, vulnerability management, and then we say, okay, hey, we want to introduce this new tool, this new process, this new step that teams need to go through. Step 1 is, I have an idea. I need to go and talk to whoever on the platform engineering side or the engineering team that's responsible or has the most in-depth knowledge on that. Go and talk to them and ask them for their opinion. Like, does this make sense, or do we have this solved in another way already? If that is positive, then okay, great. Let's figure out how big of a gap is this, and if it's possible, then we'll go and talk to one team that would need to make the change and ask them, hey, is this feasible? What does this look like? How complex is this? Are we talking nonsense? Is this not possible at all? Completely destroys the whole product, because then that doesn't work. And once we're positive there, then we'll go to team 2, and then we'll maybe go through teams 3 and 4, and then maybe we'll go to the next 4 or 5 teams, and we gradually go up. Once we have about 30 to 40% of the org done that way, and we'll keep going faster and faster, then we can really start thinking about, okay, now we want to flip the switch and passes on to all the teams. And part of that early approach should include the teams that are the big offenders, if you want to call it that, or the teams that have the biggest gaps to close so that they have time to work through this. And that approach should take weeks or months, should not be taking days, that cycle. But we found that it helps us a few things. It helps build trust, that people know, okay, you guys have not rushed this, you know what you're doing. It helps weed out edge cases and raise those to the front where you can already address them and make sure the next team doesn't get hit by it. Especially when you start looking at scale, attribution is a massive problem. So knowing who really owns an asset or really know who owns the fix is a massive challenge that we also often have. So as you build up that path forward, you gain momentum, you get all the knowledge in place, you get all the support in place, and that's how you can build it up. And we have our internal dashboards that says, hey, this all needs to be fixed. For us, a rule of thumb is that kind of like already 40% of the initial population should be fixed before we push it to the dashboard for any new tool, any new data set, or any new control. Because then we know that we have a good understanding of it. We've talked to engineering in depth. We understand what it looks like. Whereas, as you mentioned that earlier, right? If I just send a Slack message to all of engineering and say like, hey, this tool is coming, people will be like, okay, sure, great. But it hasn't been battle tested. It's only been tested in our hypothetical situation or in our own analysis. We might have talked to that expert who knows very well how the technology works, but then the million different use cases and how it is applied in the real world may or may not work. So that's the framework that we've started using over the last 2 years, and that is actually paying off dividends quite well at the moment.
You mentioned a lot of we, but who has the final word?
And I mean, yes, ultimately, like my neck is on the line there.
Okay.
But if people like I'm not with this framework, right, saying anything about the technology or about what the next step should be, because I don't know, right? I've got like 15 to 20 engineers who all work with like deep subject matter experts about a particular technology changes they want to do, right? They know better than I do. So as soon as they come to me and say, like, hey, we want to go about this, and we've started to talk to these teams and it makes sense and we want to scale up, then yes, then I 100% trust that they are right. My job there is to make sure we don't do too much change in one go at engineering. Help our team understand what is more important right now, this program or that program, so that we stay within that 1 or 2 asks per week kind of thing. And as long as we do that, right, we find that, yes, it works fine. People know what to expect. People see that we provide them high signal, even for like the large scale automated things like vulnerability management scanning, which is always causing a lot of false positives. But people trust that now, and that helps. That helps a lot.
And why do you think attribution is such a big challenge? Because you mentioned like to find out, attribute actually who the fix to. Why do you think still it's a challenge? Because if someone built this part of it properly, you can kind of see the code owner on GitHub or GitLab, So why do you think it's so hard?
In theory, it should be very simple. But in practice, what we see, right, within Zendesk, we still have a few mono repos. How do you handle ownership there? That's a difficult one. If you look at infrastructure, at some points there's like fallbacks or things that are not tagged perfectly correct, but there's some things are tagged correctly, or there's ownership changes. And that is like, if you come in a completely fresh environment, great, you can put those rules in place and everybody will adhere to it. But in our reality, that is not the case. And then what we find in particular, like those platform teams, they can help those level 1, level 2, level 3 increments for them to see, okay, where can we make the biggest bang for buck? Where can we really push the lever upward? It helps if they don't see a lot of noise in there or see things be assigned correctly. Wait a minute. Let's take a step back. If we talk about misattributed things, what we often do is like it falls back to those platform teams, and that gives them a lot of noise. So then it's like, hey, you have these 2 services that really are having vulnerabilities or misconfigurations or whatnot. But because we have fallback, we also give you these other 1,000 services that you don't really own, but hey, are somehow being backtracked to you. And that really adds a whole lot of noise to that data set. So that's how it manifests. And if we give then noise to people or stuff that they don't own, but through whatever quirk it's assigned to them, yeah, that's difficult. So when we go to those first one or two teams, right, we ask them like, hey, is this data set correct? And they will help us, okay, is your attribution logic, is that correct? And then for teams 1 or 2, it might be yes. And then we go to 4, 5, and 6, and they may tell us, wait a minute, you guys are misattributing this. This isn't us. This is that and that team. You can see this by this and this logic. And we have a lot of custom logic in place to deal with the attribution, but it works. And we've done that through trial and error, but at a small scale. And if you report all of that in one go to Hall of Engineering, the trust is immediately gone and people will not trust the program anymore. And I'm sure there's plenty of people with the experience of, hey, we turn on a tool and assign it to engineering, just create JIRA tickets or whatever. And people ignore it because it's noise. These things definitely don't help if you don't know who the right person is to assign something to.
Okay, super interesting. Because like today I saw on LinkedIn someone wrote a post that started to go like viral, saying, yeah, a lot of tools just send a Slack, to security engineer. While why don't they just find automatically code owner and send Slack directly to them? So it kind of based on like drawing, what you're saying, it's kind of more gonna create a mess because it's very hard to identify the code owner rather than actually, automates the process. So do you think in all cases, like security engineer really has to have a control on what's being sent to the developers?
Yes, even if we ignore this signal to noise conversation there, the attribution, the ownership, and making sure we understand really what it is gives us a context and make sure we assign to the right person. We go and talk to the right person, somebody who really can change something about the problem. If you look, for example, at GitHub, at code owners, you see, especially in more early stage companies, they don't care about any of that, rightfully so, right? They just need to make sure that their company stays in existence rather than do cool security things. So that cleanup only comes in as companies start to scale up. And what I then often see or have seen is we assign to individuals and we think Bob built this thing, so let's go and assign to Bob. And then tomorrow Bob leaves the company and then we're stuck back, we're getting back to square one. And then the next iteration is, okay, teams own this. And then it starts to get a little bit more long-term and less prone to attribution problems. And then obviously services get change ownership and that throws another curveball at it. But as companies as a whole stabilize a little bit like that, it becomes a little bit easier. And there's multiple teams that have a benefit in ownership being clear. But in my very limited, I will say, only 2 companies, we were among the first ones that really wanted to have that clarification of, okay, who really owns this? So we needed to do the majority of the lifting. And you're not going to be able to do that if you try and do everything in one go. That needs a small, iterative, incremental approach.
Okay, interesting. Because like at the company where I work, we literally build this feature, to help to identify code owners. So it's very interesting, to hear your feedback, as a practitioner, how useful it is as well. If you would be I don't know, product manager or head of product or at the AppSec or ProdSec vendor, like when prioritizing features like this for the product, what do you think they should focus first? Like how should they approach prioritization of these features? Because sometimes depending on organization, as I can see, it's going to be different, or like you can see clearly the goal, but then it might be not the best way forward. Do you think it should like more it should be technical prioritization or actually helping product security team to somehow collaborate with their development team?
Yes to both. The vendors typically know the space incredibly well. Because obviously that's why they became vendors in that space. They thought they solved a problem and they had a solution. So I expect to see the vendors that I have that deep craft expertise and say these 1, 2, or 3 things are really bad or really important for you to fix, and the other 1,000 items, like you can wait with that. It's not as and then help us understand, okay, what does good look like, and we should know with it internally, okay, what is the context of why that service is using this technology or this configuration? what the right team is and enable those security engineers with the right information, understand what context is needed to really say, okay, this particular case is not that bad, or this case is really bad, bridge that gap. Because I can turn on any tool and it will give me a million findings and I have no clue where to start, right? If I have the knowledge of an expert company says, yeah, just these three, go start with those. That's all recommendation. And I'm sure there's a lot of legal documents that need to be signed to make sure that that is not a cause of blame when a breach happens, right? But that is the advice that I would look for in helping us understand where to start, especially for early programs when the tool is just getting turned on. And if people just say like, oh, yeah, use whatever CVSS score, that's a little bit underwhelming, and I want to see more analysis out of that.
Interesting. But just what we're trying to do is kind of, and also not we get deviated from CVSS score, but more integrated also trying to understand business context and include that into prioritization, because CVSS score is just quite often not enough. Because that's you mentioned like context is super important.
It is, right? And we as security people, we speak the security context. We really know what it means when something is exposed or is vulnerable to something. And we really have that knowledge. And engineering teams often have a limited view on that, or they just don't want to be disturbed. So it's up to us to really go to an engineering team when we really are confident, like this is something that needs eyes. It may or may not need to be fixing, but this is interesting enough that it warrants going to talk to you about it, right? If I just want to dump all the results of a tool into a spreadsheet and tell people to go fix it, I don't need security engineers. I just need data engineers. But if I need to look at, okay, where do we optimize those 1 or 2 tasks per week that we have, get the best bang for buck out of it to really help our company become more secure one step at a time, that's where security engineers, the most effective ones that I see, like they really shine at understanding context or building that context, knowing how good or bad something is, and being able to chain 5 items together in one fix rather than trying to bring 5 separate items their way. So,
but you don't become, the expert and excellent security engineer overnight. So how would you, for a young professional who just wants to get started, what advice would you give them to learn, to understand the business context from a security perspective, the quickest possible?
Go and talk to more experienced security engineers with you that you know are doing a good job at that, and ask them like how they prioritize issues, how they prioritize problems. When they say something's not a big deal, why they're saying that. If you are getting a job at any modern day company, right, you have technical skills, not a question, even if you just come out of college, or you'll be very easily able to learn those. It's as this, the crux of this conversation is like, it's the soft skills or it's that context building skills that is difficult, and that just requires someone to be willing to sit down with you and teach you and help you understand how to grow that muscle. And that's also, like, as a hiring manager, that is something I set time aside for. I make sure I pair people up with onboarding buddies that are good at that skill in particular, to build up that skill set, because that skill set is invaluable, and it's hard to build without real life experience.
Sure.
It's hard to get that. Like, you can listen to a podcast, you can read books or whatever that help you kind of see it, but experience in the real world is more important. And if you end up in a company that does not have this approach, then that's completely fine too, but then it's going to be hard to build that. It is really experience.
Sometimes you might also have like projects, at least to have a bit of projects aside, also to understand exactly like how things are built, how the applications are built. That's what I've tried personally to do when if I don't work specifically on these topics, but it's still very interesting to just understand from a different point of view how things are done, even if like you want to break down the application install calorie and then kind of you do bug bounty, of course, things like that. But it's just good to just to understand how people do it from different perspective. And there's one question I always ask at the end of the podcast. So if there would be a book that you would recommend to someone, what would it be?
Well, that's a difficult question. If we're talking about communication, because I think that's the key thing, I found a lot of value in a book called The Culture Map. by,
Okay.
I think her name is Erin Meyer. As a Dutch person, we tend to be direct. I've been burnt multiple times in the past by being too direct. I have learned to tone things down, but I'm still regarded by my colleagues as being very direct, whereas my friends and people here around me will say I've become a little bit soft.
Okay.
It is, it is an interesting thing, and how different languages, different cultures on aggregate communicate. Obviously, every human being is different, but it helps you at least think about hey, this person is coming from a different culture than I am. Let's be clear about what we mean, or clear about our intents, rather than an unintentional miscommunication causing a loss of trust or a loss of that relationship. Especially as I think we are saying quite a lot in this conversation, is going to talk to people is important. To make sure you understand what they're saying is important. And if you're Americans working with Americans, it's a little bit easier. But as soon as you are in a multinational global company we've got people from Australia to the US and everything else in between. Everything else in between. You get to deal with multiple cultures, and miscommunications is a very easy thing to happen. So anything you can do to make it a little bit easier helps a lot.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, because I come from Russian background. I work in France and go a lot to the Netherlands since I have a family there. So it's very difficult sometimes to find the common language. At least it was in the beginning. Now it changed. Well, thank you so much, Koen, for coming on the podcast. I think we've learned a lot, and I hope the listeners learned a lot from our conversation. And thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Much appreciated.